Еще будете в микрофон говорить? Если можно, не перед динамиком, иначе сейчас очень заведется.
Dear guests, we are starting our panel discussion. Please take your seats. We are now ready to begin our panel discussion titled Securing a Resilient Future for Small Island Developing States. Allow me to introduce our moderator, Jacqueline Gagume, Program Officer, Constitutional Law and Economy Program, Institute of Economic Affairs, Kenya. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, it's my distinct honor to be moderating this next panel on securing a resilient future for small island developing states. I am joined by an exceptional panel of speakers that I will introduce shortly. But before we begin the discussion, I'd like to state very briefly a brief context. The reason we're here, the discussion is focused on what you'll hear being referred to obviously as SIDs, but they face a number of distinct socioeconomic and developmental challenges that are attributed to a number of factors that they have in common. So these nations are very small in size. They are remote geographical location. They have, most of them have very limited economic diversification, and they have, because of these factors, they're very vulnerable to various climate and environmental shocks. So the confluence of these factors has posed significant challenges in terms of their ability to achieve the sustainable development goals. And we've had various policy proposals at the global level that have been implemented to try and facilitate their, to address the challenges that they have in common. So what we'd like to do in the next 40 minutes or so is to unpack the issues that SIDs face as a group, and then rethink the proposals for reform that might be required at the global arena. And to help us unpack these issues, I'm joined by my panel that I will now introduce. So first of all, we have Zulmira Rodriguez, who is the Chief of Section for Small Island Developing States, UNESCO. And then next to Zulmira, we have Jacques Bell, Minister Councillor and also Deputy Permanent Delegate of Seychelles to UNESCO. Then we have Eric Gregorian, please forgive me if I mispronounce any name, who is the founder and CEO of the Environment Group, Special Envoy, and also a Special Envoy on the debt for climate negotiations in Armenia. And then lastly, but obviously not least, we have Yerevan Daniel, who is the Executive Group Director of Capital Maharaja Group, Sri Lanka. So we'll begin with first thinking about the challenges, paint a picture for us around the main structural, Zulmira, I'll start with you, paint a picture for us around the main structural and systemic issues that have constrained the attainment of SDGs by SIDs. I've spoken about them broadly, but I'd like to hear from your perspective, being in the inner circle, whether you think the current UN development strategies are sufficient to address these challenges and how exactly you perceive the challenges.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, and thank you indeed to the government of Armenia for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to speak at this forum. And I think many more of these events are needed because although we all talk about SIDS vulnerabilities, there is really very little being done to support them to overcome these challenges. SIDS, as you already said, Jacqueline, they have challenges linked to their own geographic structure. They are often in remote areas, often dispersed over many islands, and they are very susceptible for external shocks. So they are, we know, in the forefront of climate change, although they are not the ones creating the bulk of the climate change challenges. They are the ones actually on the forefront. So they are very vulnerable to earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, droughts, floods. So that is a huge problem because, in a way, because these events also are recurrent, many seeds have the little gains they do in development, they need often to reuse them to recover from these shocks. At the same time, seeds are also particularly vulnerable because of their smallness. Small institutions, not the capacity to to present all the services that are needed to their populations, and also limited human capacity. That is then exacerbated by brain drain of the population, young people that look for either education or employment elsewhere. So that is a very important internal structural challenge. As you already said, limited economic diversification, many being dependent on tourism, a little bit on fishery, small land territories whereby food security becomes a problem, and therefore also very dependent on external exports. And we saw that with COVID, how seeds suffered not only from the health risk, but actually from the blockages of travel and transportation. Then, but at the same time, seeds are also very resilient, and they also have many assets. Seeds have the most biodiversity composition in the world. They hold very specific ecosystems that are very important for mankind. And in a way, it's a common interest of mankind to also ensure that that biodiversity is conserved. There are also large ocean states. And although we have not paid so much attention to ocean development, but oceans are becoming more and more important, and in the current agenda, global development agenda, they are taking a more prominent role. But they also have beautiful special cultures that are also being threatened by sea level rise, and being threatened by also the brain drain and, as I said before. So in a nutshell, these are the challenges that they face. Whether the development agenda addresses correctly, I think the problem is not really the issue of the development agenda. I think the issue is really the problem of resources, the availability of resources. And of course, we know, and our colleagues from SEEDS here, they know more than anyone else. For more than 30, 40 years, SEEDS have been claiming to get special attention because of their vulnerability, as ODA and also financial assistance is very much linked to GDP norms and not necessarily to the vulnerability of SEEDS themselves. So that makes SEEDS one of the most indebted groups in the world, because of many seeds being middle high income or high income countries. When they face this kind of, let's say, catastrophic disasters, they are obliged to go and borrow on the commercial market, which of course accrues their debt. So for me, the issue is not really the issue of the agenda. The issue is the support that is being given to seeds. Thank you.
Thanks, Zulmira, and we'll come back to that question of resources. I think Eric will tackle a bit of it, but just building on where Zulmira has left, I'll come to you, Jacques, and the question is, from your perspective, what challenges in terms of climate adaptation for seeds tend to be overlooked or underrepresented in various global policy forums?
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm very pleased to be here. I think it's a very important issues, seeds. Like my colleague Zulmira said, we need to voice out our concerns because we are small and developing states. We are very vulnerable, and there are indeed a lot of challenges. And one of them, the most important one, I think, is the limited access to climate finance. In fact, there are a lot of seats. There's around, in fact, 60 seats across the world in different regions, being the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, the Atlantic. We are a big group. But in fact, like my colleague Zumera said, in fact, there are different kind of GDP. There are certain countries, like my country, who has a high revenue income. We have, in fact, the highest GDP per capita in Africa. Some will think that we are the richest African countries, but it's not the case. In fact, it's because our small population, we are only 120,000 people, and in fact, because we benefit from a lot from the tourist revenue, and then there's also, of course, other seats are middle income, middle revenue, low revenue, and but because of the fact that we do not have, how would I say, our GDP is high, we are being penalized by international financiers. We are not getting access to concessionary fund. And this is very important, it's very problematic to us. This is why we are very delightful with other countries and grouping of seats, because we need to continue and advocate for climate justice. Because Seychelles, like many of us, we are very vulnerable to climate hazards, to all these external shocks. You know, all these. The COVID was one example. We are developing states, small island developing states. So for us, it's important to continue the advocacy of the multi-vulnerable dimension, MVI. I think you've heard about it. It has recently been adopted last year at the UN General Assembly. Basically, we want the international community to take into account, like I said, the specificities of small and developing states across the world. So this is one challenge. We know that there's also the fact that we are islands, so we are very isolated. We are remoteness. You know, we are, for instance, Seychelles is a big archipelago. We are in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We are very far from the continent, from the continent, and so when there's a natural disaster, it makes the disaster response and even the recovery more difficult, you know, and so there's an increase of costs, a lot of challenges, and this is why I believe. We believe that in the future, now that of course there's a lot of that has been done at the level of the SITS conference, also there was the COP29 in Baku, a lot of important recommendation that was made, like the loss and damage fund, for instance. This is also an important point, whereby countries agree that we should compensate, should compensate countries that have been severely affected by the climate change. So this is also that has been already fully operationalized. So it's important that we continue the advocacy, because we are very remote, and Seychelles will definitely, and we need training. And this is also an important challenge because we are very far. We do not have like centers that are dedicated for the climate change monitoring on a regular basis. For instance, we do have, like in Seychelles, we have a center on maritime security, because we also are affected by a lot of maritime threats like piracy attacks. Now there's a little bit less, but illegal fishing, there's a lot of maritime threat. But again, these are human-led factors. Why not having also a center that will comprise of climate scientists, will be on the ground, on the site, to do a proper monitoring, so that at least we have localized data, we have adequate data that we can also show to all our partners, and so that they can agree that we are also vulnerable. Because the problem is that currently most of the resources, they rely on global climate models, and this is why we need some expertise from, of course, our international partners like UNESCO, like other international organizations, if they can come to Seychelles, to other of our 6 countries, and take note of all the challenges that we have faced. And this is why it's important, because we cannot just wait for a disaster to come. We'll be very vulnerable due to the fact that our infrastructures are very limited. we need support. We need a lot of technology transfer. We need alone we cannot do it. We need united we stand. So we need this support from all these partners that are very willing to assist our islands. So voila, in a nutshell, I will say the main challenges is to get this concessionary finance. It's something that we will continue to advocate, to voice out in different international forums like the one we are here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that very comprehensive perspective. You made a point about the limited access to climate finance, which leads well to my next question, because a big part of building the resilience of the seeds is obviously the question of financing. I think Zulmira also made that point. And many states are actually struggling with sustainable financing. So my question to you, Eric, is how has the debt burden exacerbated the fragility of seeds and limited their climate adaptation capacities?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me for this panel. Years ago with UNESCO, we developed a policy paper for Pacific seeds and how some kind of financial innovation tools can help Pacific seeds to tackle some, we call it a double crisis, but it was a time that it was a triple crisis. So it was also COVID there. So COVID that limited income of countries because of tourism, and we have a debt problem, and we have a climate reality as of one of the most vulnerable actually regions in the world. But we are in some kind of closed cycle because it's not a regular situation, and you can't compare with other kind of economies that can plan, for example, debt service or economic projections, because it may be a situation that everything seems nice. So your financial data, information, the figures, everything is nice. And one single hurricane or one natural disaster may completely change the situation, increase your debt burden on 20–30% or even double it. And then you will need to get money actually to invest on infrastructure, but it's something to invest on past, not the future, because you need to invest also for early warning systems, for climate adaptation, for different activities related to climate. So the situation is quite complicated because the seeds are in this closed cycle. They need to borrow money to invest on infrastructure, but because of climate change that hit its seeds quite often, they will not have enough money actually to invest on adaptation. Of course, there are different options, the climate finance available in the world. Everyone can say we have a Paris Agreement, we have obligation taken by developed countries to support developing countries, and they are specifically mentioned for seeds that as a group of most climate vulnerable countries. But in reality, it's not working, because the process is to apply for this money. In most of cases, it's loans. So 70–80% of the climate money available in in market, it's loans, and those countries already facing a problem with servicing of debt. To apply for some kind of grant money, it's quite complicated and it's quite long. For example, for GCF, at least you need 36 months to prepare your proposal, and then it may, also take quite long time to implement. And another big problem that it's, I believe we can discuss this issue is also capacity, because in many cases, the capacity, internal capacity to develop enough qualified projects to apply for the donor society and to apply for financial resources is not available there. So just to conclude in this question, it's a double crisis that and the climate is very much connected with each other, and the current climate architecture is not supporting. As already mentioned, the GDP per capita is higher, so there is no available financial resources, and vulnerability factors are not considered yet. During the last two COPs, this was discussed quite broadly to give some kind of opportunities for 1-2 years for the vulnerable countries, but these mechanisms are still not working. Loss and damage was mentioned here, but it's the money that it's expected under loss and damage is very, very low. Just to say that under Paris Agreement, it's supposed to have 100 billion per year to be financed to developing countries for implementation of NDCs. But most of the resources under this pledge is loans again, and we are coming back to the problem that we already mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. And I think that moves naturally to the question to bringing in the private sector. And I have a question for you, Yerevan. What's the role of the private sector here? We've talked about the challenges. We've talked about the role of different actors. We've talked about the debt question. And I'm wondering, in your perspective, how has the private sector in SIDs or SIDS responded to these growing climate and development risks? And I have a two-part question for you. Do you have any examples of resilience, for instance, that you can cite here from your experience, both from the media and private sector in Sri Lanka?
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you everyone for being here at this late hour. To speak about the Sri Lankan example, I think I'm going to start by sharing the fact that Sri Lanka is basically founded on Buddhist philosophy, and one of the key elements of Buddhism is to understand the root or the cause of the problem. And so I'm just going to frame the issue from the Sri Lankan perspective right now. So even though we are considered a small island, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. Sri Lanka has punched above its weight for many reasons for thousands of years. Right now, even though we are 65,000 square kilometers in terms of our land mass, Sri Lanka's economic zone, exclusive economic zone, its ocean, the Sea of Sri Lanka, is nearly 250,000 square kilometers, almost a multiple of 8 of its land mass. So it's a very large and influential part of the world. Now, if I were to tell you that something or anything that's been exported to wherever you're from, whichever country you represent, there's a chance, a high probability, over 50%, that that product or item passed by Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone would then give an idea of just how important Sri Lanka's EEZ is. Over 65,000 naval vessels, including 4,500 oil tankers annually pass by our waters. That's about 40% of global commerce. Now, you might be wondering why I'm giving you these numbers. And obviously, the freedom of navigation means that we welcome global commerce to pass by our waters. But the environmental damage has nothing to do with us. The environmental damage on Sri Lanka is double that. The greenhouse gases emitted by Sri Lanka in its own development is dwarfed by the environmental damage caused by global commerce. And there is no reconciliation of that. Global organizations, lending agencies are very quick to take punitive action and measures against small islands and small nations whenever they may be financially indisciplined. But then it's not part of our development agenda, and it's certainly not due to climate change. It's due to global commerce that a country like Sri Lanka has experiences, and increasingly so, the detrimental impacts of this kind of commercial activity. So that is immeasurable. We have no idea what that impact is. There's no cap on that. But if you talk about our own development and our own progress agenda, the key impact is to the private sector. Much more than what the private sector does, the impact is to the private sector, mainly the micro, small, and medium-scale industries, entrepreneurs. Sri Lanka, on an average year, will lose about $300 to $400 million as a result of climate incidents. Of that, over 50%, around $200 million, are the losses faced by the small, micro, and medium-scale entrepreneurs. And there are no real measures to protect them, to offer them insurance schemes, to provide them with pre-warnings and information. There's really no proper standardized process to support these very, very important parts of our economy to help them get back on their feet once they've faced a flood or a drought or whatever it might be. So I think the key here is that understanding the impact on a country like Sri Lanka requires us to look at it in different lens. So it's really important to understand that there has to be some kind of mechanism of somehow replenishing Sri Lanka's, and look, the Middle East has its oil. Africa has its gold and its diamonds. All your nations will have its resources, but you don't have all of these resources being exploited like it does in Sri Lanka's case. Yes, freedom of navigation, we understand that, but you also have to understand that all of that pollution is in our waters, and something has to be done about it, and nothing is. And so my friend here was proposing that there must be some kind of mitigating measure, maybe a balancing act where Sri Lanka's debt could somehow be set off some of our climate goals. Well, it has to be taken more seriously, because I really do think that unless that is addressed, then it will only exacerbate the impact on the private sector by things like climate change.
Wow, thanks, Yerevan, for bringing the other angle, the implications for the private sector. I think that paints a different picture even from what I initially thought. And so linked to that, I come back to you, Zulmira, and my question here is, in terms of reforms, there have been multiple attempts at implementing various reforms. Obviously, there's a reason why we have not seen the successes that are desired. So in your view, what shifts or reforms are required at the level of multilateral coordination to better support climate resilient development in SIDS? I know you already said earlier that you think the biggest problem is financing and resources, but are there any other policy reforms or that you can think about?
I think that there is, of course, a lot that can be done in terms of improving articulation, coordination among the multilateral partners, so that we avoid wastage of resources because there is quite a lot going on that we are not really aware. I'm not sure, for instance, what UNEP is doing in biodiversity or necessarily. So I think a lot can be done in terms of improving this coordination. But I think that most important is actually, I think that the multilateral system is being discredited also. We see in this conjuncture that we are living today here, that the UN is under pressure, very much so. And sometimes I think that we also receive limited support from the SIDS countries themselves in terms of pronouncing themselves as whether they need us or not. I remember recently we were applying for a fund from the Kunming, Montreal in one country, we wanted to make a pledge for a regional proposal, and they said, no, we are working together with another agency, we are not going to support you. So definitely, it is difficult for me to speak, of course, what needs to happen in the overall context of multilateralism. But I think that there are attempts being done. It's better than before. I mean, I've been in this function since 2021, and I see there is much more dialogue and collaboration under the coordination of UNDESA and OCHRLS. SIDS 4, we worked a lot together to make the agenda a collective agenda. But I think the reform cannot come only from the United Nations. I think that a bilateral support, understanding that UN, we are honest brokers. We don't serve interests of any country. We do try to serve the interest of the least developed, the most vulnerable. But of course, there is still a lot to be done. And I think that by creating these multi-country offices where the UN is trying to merge UN agencies into one spot, we will then then the communication will be better, the articulation will be better. And I think on the ground that happens a lot. But IS region, there is no articulation mechanism. The government of Cabo Verde, I'm not sure if is anybody from the IS region, except the two of you, Mauritius and Comor. But there was very recent last week a meeting to create a regional entity to support or to advocate for the SIDS and IS region. Those kind of structures are important. But then that goes along that I felt, you know, when we asked whether we could be in as observers, we were told, no, this is for member states only. Later on, they let us in because, I mean, we are partners. So, I mean, it has to come from two sides. I think the government of Guterres has done a lot in terms of breaking some of the silos, getting agencies to work more together. But I must say, and this is my personal opinion, when I was in New York in the preparation of SIDS 4, I was very disappointed how little space was given for for the United Nations to plead and to address some issues. And I think it's a huge challenge. I mean, it is between the UN is way too broad, too big. SIDS are very small, so we tend perhaps to go more to the bigger countries where there are larger populations, where there are larger, let's say, the scale of the problem seems bigger. And so SIDS tend to fall in between the cracks because they are so tiny and so small. But I think what the UN can do is help the evidence base that Yerevan was talking about, getting the data, the information. It's a very good tip on the issue of the impact of maritime traffic to environment. We are now doing with UNESCO, for instance, tracking how boats bring alien species to the waters of SIDS. We had a beautiful project concluded in Fiji with the help of eDNA. So we need to improve the data, the availability, so that when you, as countries, you go to those big international gatherings, you really have something to substantiate your claim. And in that regard, we need to work together as the UN, try to set up these systems that I say complementary. And we need to work together to support capacity. You know, we saw with COVID, the countries that had more scientific capacity, they were the ones to secure treatment or prevention within their own populations. And of course, countries like SIDS, they were at the end of the queue. until something was available. So what Jake was talking about, improving capacity, technical, scientific capacity, not only to understand your problems, but also come with solutions, because your problems are mostly your problems. And the solidarity that we are expecting from the wider world is not always there. So it is important to create that autonomy also, that capacity, domestic capacity to address your own problem. And for that, you need to collaborate. As seeds, you have to collaborate together. There was a beautiful initiative brought in 2005. It was the UCSIS, the University Consortium for Small Island States, precisely to stress and complement each other's limited capacities. We need to invest more in those kind of instruments where you work together. Seychelles works together with Mauritius. In the Caribbean, we have the West Indies University that are already working a lot together. And the same in the Pacific with the SPC. But I think it is important that we put more investment in developing capacity, really scientific capacity. And in that regard, the UN reform could help in terms, and it is helping a bit. We have the decade of ocean sciences. Now we have the decade of natural sciences for development. So there is more and more space for that. And of course, I'm very proud that UNESCO is an important partner for you and has been trying to develop these capacities. We are trying to develop models for centers of excellence. We are starting now with one with Lusophone countries in developing marine sciences and biodiversity. We hope with these models then to create spaces also for Anglophone, Francophone, and Spanish-speaking countries. But we need to, I think it is about working together, not only within regions, but even across regions, share capacities. And the UN can help because we have such a broad, let's say, scope and so many decades. We are celebrating 80 years of UNESCO now. So there is a lot of capacity that has been pent up and can be used. But we need you also to claim and use the UN as your preferred partners when you broker for these very complicated funds from the Green Climate Funds and etc. So I think it is not something that the UN can do together. We need to work together, all of us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Zulmira. I know we've already gone to the solutions, and my next question to Jacques was a little painted from the challenges perspective, but we can try and refine this because I wanted to hear from you regarding the limited economic diversification of seeds and how this heightens their vulnerability to the climate and external market shocks. And so I'm wondering what opportunities then, can we find any opportunities for building resilience to address this challenge? Yeah, so thinking about it from a solutions dimension. Yeah.
Sorry. In fact, yes, most of the seats, they heavily rely on tourism, like my country, where 60% GDP, most of the revenue is thanks to tourism and fisheries as well. And the problem is because we are entirely depending on tourism, if there's an external shocks, like let's say, or like the COVID, we've seen with the COVID, then we are in a very delicate situation. What has happened, in fact, in 2020, when Seychelles, we had to, all the flights could not come anymore. We had to take a daring move to open the borders. But before doing so, what the government has decided to do is to reach. In fact, we are one of the first countries to reach collective immunity. meaning that we have managed to vaccinate more than 60% of our population in a short period of time. By doing so, in fact, we have reassured the tourism market. So tourism has started progressively to come to Seychelles, and we had no other choice. It was a question of survival. We had to do so, because otherwise, it would have been very difficult to us. So these are kind of measures we've taken. And it's very important because we depend only on tourism and fisheries. We are aware that we are extremely vulnerable because also if there's any climatic hazards like the sea rise, the rise will, in fact, it's a fact. The sea will rise. According to experts, they say in 2100 or almost 1 meter of sea rise. And for us, it's already a lot. There will be some islands in Seychelles, because we are a big archipelago. There are, in fact, 42 granitic islands and 73 coral islands. And those coral islands represent 63% of our islands. And it says that in a few decades, most of those coral islands will be wiped out from the map. There will be others that will be uninhabited. And this means that there will be no more tourists, and those will not be able to come if there's no islands to visit, there's no beach to relax, you see. So this is why we are very conscious about that, and we always use a forum like this one to voice out our concern. And talking about that, of course, we rely also a lot of importations for essential goods, for energy, for commodities. So you can imagine if there's any external shocks, any crisis in the global crisis, how affected will be in terms of trade restrictions. So it will be very catastrophic for small island developing countries like us. So this is why Seychelles has a solution. Like I will also inform you that last year we participated to the advisory proceedings of the International Court of Justice, whereby we made our concern, we have expressed our concern to the court, and the court helped to clarify also the obligation of states in terms of climate change. The court has agreed also that they listened to our vulnerabilities. We've put emphasis on that, highlighting the severe impact on climate change. And so it was a very important proceeding, although it's not legally binding, but we believe it will help in future negotiations, at least to sensitize the international community about the needs for developed countries, those that I will say pollute the most, because we are the ones that are affected the most on climate change. We are the ones that pay the consequences, so we believe it's important, like I said again, any kind of platform we will utilize and will let them know about this injustice. So this is why there's this ICJ that has made some very tangible recommendation, and of course we will do a follow-up on that. And also there is also an important alliance called the Alliance of Small Island States, which is currently chaired by Palau. And there are around 39 member states of seats across the world from different regions. And this is also an important forum because they are the ones that really will help to raise concern as one voice, because most of our challenges are similar. In fact, they are the same. And so it's important. They also organize international fellowship program, so they groom, our nationals, our experts, so that they can, advocate the seats, climatic change challenges everywhere. So, and they, of course, they are there also to help drafting policies. In fact, they are the one, this alliance, that helped to draft the Paris Agreement, the famous Paris Agreement. So these are kind of solutions, I will say, that we rely upon. Even also, I should talk a little bit about my region. We have this Indian Ocean Commission, which is based in Mauritius, islands like Comoros, Madagascar, and Réunion also, represented by France through La Réunion. And Seychelles is there, and environment issues, climate change is top on the agenda. And it's very important. You have mentioned the Green Climate Fund, Zulmira. All of that are important financing that will help for us to really because it's a continuous struggle, you know. And I was referring earlier about this loss and damage fund, which is also a very important fund that in fact at the COP29 in Baku last November, they've fully operationalized it. So to start, how would I say, attracting, to get some resources to compensate, you know, those, like I said, those that have contributed a little to climate change, and yet they suffer the most. Like cities are the one that really, because you know, I will not be, I should be, it's true that climate change will affect everyone in the end, but the cities are really the one that are in the forefront, you know, will be the one losing our territory, losing our sovereignty, the water will rise, the climate change we already experienced. In fact, Seychelles recently I got one is highest temperature, almost 40 degrees, I think it was last month. You recall what has happened in Dubai as well, you know, this thunderstorm, you know, things are changing. Even in Paris, where I'm from, we had, although we are in spring, there was hailstone, you know, and then the climate change, the disruption, it started to be cool, and it's getting hot again and back again, you know. So it's a fact, you know, it's a reality that we need to face and need to address collectively, and we will continue in advocating because this is something that is quite serious for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack. I know we started 10 minutes late, so I intend for us to get back our 10 minutes, but we will conclude in the next 10 minutes. So, because I'll also give an opportunity for one question from the floor, but before then, I'll ask the next two speakers to respond to this in just about 2 minutes or so, the next two questions. Eric, I know you had already alluded to the question of where the climate finance frameworks fall short. So I'll just ask you to summarize what financing tools you think could unlock sustainable resilience for seeds. What, innovative tools you think? Yeah.
Thank you.
2 minutes, please.
We'll try.
Okay.
Actually, we see that even the whole funding that will come from UN institutions and even from MDBs, it will definitely not be enough to tackle climate issues and even to finance some part of NDCs that already submitted to Secretariat. So much more money is needed. That's why I believe that Debt for Climate Swap is something that may help developing countries to find financial resources recently to do primarily adaptation, because from one side we have a situation that developed countries are facing a problem with the qualified proposals coming from the other countries, and the other countries don't have enough money actually to do climate adaptation. We already discussed the situation with SIDS, that this close cycle is going on and on. So practically it was a Debt for Nature swap coming from 80s, but it was a different tool. So it was some kind of debt restructuring mechanism. The countries that were facing a problem with the debt services, they were just applying to Paris Club to get some privileges and to do their work better. But what we propose actually, if two countries will try to be as short as possible, if two countries, debitor and creditor, happy to work together without complicating the process, just focusing on their NDCs, and to invest money locally in a country and agree on this, then the process may start. So theoretically, we can take to Sri Lanka. I had the chance to work in Sri Lanka for 2 years recently. So they have 300 million debt to France. They are in a problem of climate change with the debt and other, and they are discussing with France if they will be happy to swap this money, and Sri Lanka is going to spend this money internally on climate adaptation. Of course, they can negotiate, bring more justifications to include some private entities. For example, it's a big hydro potential in Sri Lanka. They may discuss and negotiate with France if they will buy turbines from French companies. But in the end, Sri Lanka will report that this is a climate finance that they receive from France, and France will report UNFCCC that it's a climate finance under their obligation. This is a very important part because we are not talking about the goodwill or any kind of other issue. Those are the obligations from both sides. So this mechanism is just helping these countries to swap this process and to invest in adaptation now, because everyone knows that if you are not investing $1 today, so after a few years it will be 5, 10 and more. So more is available actually in internet or some papers that we prepared for Pacific Seed or from Sri Lanka, but I believe this is a mechanism that will really tangibly help developing countries to find the climate finance now, not after 5 years or 10 years and other, but now, because they will invest by their domestic currency. This is the money that is available in budget, and instead of paying us a foreign debt, they will invest in the country and also initiating socio-economic positive impact, the new jobs, infrastructure, and the third. I tried. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Yes, I think that's very innovative. I will not close this before I ask you, Yerevan, this next question regarding the media. What's the role of the media? Is the current media engagement sufficient to elevate the urgency of the reforms that we require to support SID's seats on the global agenda?
15 seconds.
Please, if you could, yes.
Look, I mean, ultimately we are all here because we feel responsible for the communities and the people that we represent. And I think as a media organization, it used to be quite easy to abdicate that responsibility to governments and politicians. But it's not possible to do that anymore. If you really think about it, systems around the world have been completely upended. The biggest supermarket is a software company, Amazon. The biggest transport company is a software company, Uber. And so it's really implausible to continue to expect governments and politicians to be completely responsible for the services rendered to people. Ultimately, media has incredible power because it is media that communicates. And in the palms of our hands today, we have massive power. And so with that communication, with that power comes responsibility. So it's just not enough for a media organization to say, you know what, it's not our job. Well, it is. And representing Maharaja Media, we really get involved with climate activities and incidents from reporting to rescue and everything in between. And we've annoyed successive governments and all politicians because of that, because we go directly to the people and we serve communities, we get involved in search and rescue, in reporting, in relief efforts, every single thing, because we have the ability and, most importantly, the trust of the people to lead them, to communicate, to coordinate, and make sure that the country, across all platforms, NGOs, private sector, government services, can operate in a coordinated manner in order to respond to people. So the short answer is, I think media, just like every other industry and sector, has changed. It's either change or be changed. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. I think I have 3 minutes left, so I'd like to give this opportunity to one person. Yes, please ask very briefly, state who you'd like to address your question, and that's it. Yes, your name and your question.
My name is Wahid. A question for Zulmira and another one for Jack. Zulmira, with USAID dismantled right now, who do you see filling that vacuum in terms of aid funding that supports climate resilient projects? For Jack, the alliance that you mentioned, there is abundant private capital right now going to very select thematic areas like compliance, carbon credits. What are you doing on the regulatory front to give comfort to private investors? Thank you.
Great. So just take less than a minute each. Thank you.
I think that there are many opportunities with the vertical funds that can be used. also to delink a little bit the politics from the development aid agenda. We are facing very severe times. We see that the regular ODA is reducing enormously. I don't see who's taking over. This year we expect 9% decrease on the ODA, next year 17%, and the whole run to militarize is also a very good, let's say, excuse, let's say, to reduce from development aid. I'm not sure who could take the place, but I think that there are some countries are doing and some efforts with, for instance, we are now tapping more on Germany, who has this IKI, how is it called? It is Initiative for Climate Initiative, which puts really big capitals outside. So we need to see, but I think we need to continue to talk about these ethical issues of that we cannot just simply stop climate, support climate change mitigation. We need to assume responsibilities and indeed have the culprits also pay for it. How to do it? We have the EU, the European Union, they could take that space, but it's complicated. But we also have the BRICS, we have the other side that is coming up. So perhaps it's also a new opportunity for those countries to step up and to support. Thank you.
Thanks, Zulmira. Jacques?
Yes, thank you. As you know, the alliance, in fact, thank you for your question. The alliance, as you know, is more like a platform who are trying to sensitize international partners, any kind of fund, to really assist those vulnerable developing countries. And they are the ones, in fact, that are also behind this loss and damage fund. They have been pushing for it to be materialized at the last COP29. But as you know, they, how will I say, they will try and address whenever there are certain gaps, because currently the UNFCCC contribution, I don't think this is taken into account, this loss and damage fund. Of course, they will try to get some fund from international financiers, from private donors, from, you know, but there is a lot of, it's still, in fact, it's more like, how will I say, it's a group that's trying to continue to sensitize, in fact, to sensitize the concerns of the seats, and of course it's quite new, because it's only last year that this loss and damage fund has been fully operational, and I think there's still a lot of work for them to be done, and still a lot of mobilizations to be done within their own seat members, and also of course with all the international organizations like UNESCO, like other forums that will be there to assist eventually. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think that's an excellent place to end the conversation. I will not add anything to it. Thanks to our audience for staying in despite the timing of the panel. We appreciate that. So if you could all join me in thanking the panel.